In the autumn of 1991, in a quiet mill town tucked into the folds of East Tennessee, a white church van left a harvest sing at 6:30 in the evening and never arrived home. Inside were 7 children, ages 6 to 13, and one elderly deacon who had driven that same 40-mile stretch every Saturday for 11 years. There was no wreck, no skid marks, no ransom note. Police searched 4 counties, dragged 2 rivers, and turned up nothing but a burned frame in a strip mine cut. The case quickly went cold. 25 years later, one small detail, a phone number nobody ever changed, reopened everything. And what came down that line was a truth no one was prepared for. If you find yourself pulled into this story, take 1 second to like this video and subscribe. It genuinely helps this channel reach more people who care about cases like this one. Now, let's get into today's case. Cordell Springs, Tennessee, sat in a bowl of hills where the fog came down every morning like a lid on a pot. It was a company town without a company anymore. The Farron textile mill had cut its second shift in 1987 and its third in 1989. And what remained was about 4,000 people, 2 traffic lights, and a stubborn belief that things would turn around. The town split along a line nobody drew but everybody knew. Up on Marbury Hill sat Cordell Springs' first fellowship brick, columned, a parking lot full of clean sedans. Down along Slate Row, in the shadow of the dead mill, sat Hope Bethel Mission, a converted feed store with folding chairs and a space heater that smelled like burning dust. 2 churches, 2 very different worlds, and between them, 1 van. It was a 1984 Dodge Ram wagon, white, with a blue dove hand-painted on the sliding door by a Sunday school class that had long since grown up and moved away. The heater only worked on high. 1 window wouldn't roll up past halfway. First Fellowship owned it, insured it, and paid for the gas. Hope Bethel got it every other Saturday. That was the arrangement. It had worked for 11 years. Nobody thought about it much. Nobody thought about it at all, really, until the day it mattered more than anything. Marina Beckett was 11 years old and had a gap between her front teeth she was self-conscious about in photographs and completely forgot about the rest of the time. She had rust-colored hair that never stayed in a barrette. She carried a red plastic comb in her back pocket everywhere she went, not because she used it, but because a girl at school had told her that's what you did. She could not whistle. She had tried for 2 solid years and produced nothing but air. And she practiced anyway, walking to school, sitting on the porch rail, blowing uselessly into her cupped hands. She sang, though. That she could do. Her brother Hollis was 17, 6 years older, and he had spent most of his adolescence pretending she embarrassed him. It was a lie both of them understood. He drove her to choir practice in their father's Ford. He waited in the parking lot with the radio down low. He knew every song she was learning before she did, because she sang them in the shower, with the door open, badly, at volume, at 6:30 in the morning. Their mother, Dot Beckett, waited tables at the Copper Kettle out on the highway and came home smelling like coffee and fryer oil and cigarette smoke that wasn't hers. Their father, Ray, drove a gravel truck for the county. They lived in a 4-room house on Bickle Street with a phone mounted on the kitchen wall. Avocado green with a cord long enough to reach the back stoop. The number was 555-0139. Remember that. It matters more than anything else in this story. There were 6 other children on that van, and they deserved to be more than a list. Danny Oakes was 13 and the oldest of them. He worked weekends at his uncle's tow yard and had the split knuckles to prove it. He was serious in a way that made adults uncomfortable. He looked after the little ones without being asked, and when he counted heads, he did it out loud, pointing like a man checking inventory. Ruth Ann Pryor was 9. Wesley Pryor was 7. Brother and sister inseparable from the last occupied house on Ivyhold Road. Ruth Ann did all the talking for both of them. Cecilia Marsh was 6. Everyone called her Cece. She had asthma bad enough that her mother pinned a note to her coat every single Saturday, and an inhaler in a Ziploc bag in her pocket, and a second inhaler in Deacon Trask's glove box, because her mother was the kind of woman who assumed the world would fail her and planned around it. Those 5 came from Hope Bethel, down on Slate Row. The last 2 came from up on the hill. Colleen Vance was 12. Her father owned Vance Lumber and Supply, the largest private employer left in Farron County. Jonah Little was 10. His father was Dr. Foster Little, the only dentist within 30 miles. They rode together twice a month. Hill kids and mill kids, in the same van, singing the same songs, sharing the same butterscotch discs the driver kept in the door pocket. Everyone in town thought that was beautiful. In 1991, everyone in town was wrong about what it meant. Loyal Trask was 61 years old and had driven that van since it was new. He wore a gray wool cap in every season, including August. He kept a coffee can of loose change under the driver's seat for tolls he never actually encountered. He drove exactly 4 miles an hour under the limit and did not care what anyone behind him thought about it. He'd buried a wife in 1983 and had no children of his own. The Saturday route was, as far as anyone could tell, the thing that got him out of bed. He had a rule. He counted the children onto the van, and he counted them off. Out loud, every time. 7 up, 7 down. He'd been doing it so long the kids mouthed the numbers along with him, mocking him gently, which he pretended not to notice and secretly loved. On October 12th, 1991, he counted 7 onto that van at the Marlowe Gap Fellowship Hall at 6:34 in the evening. He never got to count them off. Hollis has said, in the years since, that he doesn't trust his own memory of that afternoon. He knows what he's added. He knows grief edits things. But 3 details he swears to. The first was the schedule. The Harvest Sing at Marlowe Gap was normally a Sunday event. That year, it got moved to Saturday because the Fellowship Hall had a wedding booked. It meant the van went out on a night with no other church traffic on that road. No convoy, no caravan. 1 vehicle, 40 miles, full dark. The second was the roster. Reverend Nolan Ashby Pike, who pastored First Fellowship and technically owned the van, called Dot Beckett at the Copper Kettle on Thursday to confirm which Hope Bethel children were riding. He'd never done that before, not once in 11 years. Dot mentioned it that night at supper because she thought it was nice of him. The third was the man at the church. Hollis dropped Marina off at Hope Bethel at 4 o'clock. There was a man in the gravel lot in a green work coat, standing beside a tow truck with the hood up, doing nothing to the engine. Not looking at it, looking at the van. Hollis was 17. He noticed, and he filed it under nothing, the way 17-year-olds do. Something felt wrong, really wrong. He just didn't have a word for it yet. Marina got out, slammed the door, then leaned back in through the window and told him she'd almost gotten a whistle out that morning. An actual sound. She was going to have it by Christmas. Then she ran across the gravel toward the van. That's the last time Hollis Beckett saw his sister for 25 years. The sing ended at 6:15. There are photographs from that evening, the kind of photographs that end up in newspapers for decades afterward, cropped tighter and tighter until they're just faces. In the last one, taken at 6:29 by a woman named Belva Hutto, who was photographing her own granddaughter. You can see the van's open sliding door, the blue dove, and Danny Oakes standing beside it with his arm out, holding it for the little ones. Deacon Trask counted 7. He always counted 7. The route home was State Route 174, a 2-lane that ran the spine of Bittern Ridge for 11 miles, with no houses, no shoulder, and a 100-foot drop-off on the eastern side. It was the fastest way. It was the only way, unless you wanted to add 40 minutes going around. They were expected at Hope Bethel at 7:20. At 7:40, Emery Sissom, the lay preacher at Hope Bethel, called Marlow Gap. Yes, they'd left. Yes, on time. At 8:05, he called the sheriff's office and got a dispatcher who told him church vans run late. At 8:35, sets of parents were standing in a gravel lot on Slate Row in the cold. At 9:15, the first patrol car drove the ridge. Nothing. No van, no wreck, no debris, no skid marks. The guardrail was intact for the entire 11 miles. The deputy drove it twice, then 3 times, with his spotlight sweeping the drop. Nothing. It didn't make sense. It just didn't. A 15-passenger van does not evaporate off a 2-lane road with a rock face on one side and a cliff on the other. It goes over, or it goes through, or it turns off. There was exactly one place to turn off in 11 miles, an old logging cut at mile marker 6, gated and chained since 1988. Deputies checked the chain that night. It was locked. Nobody thought to check whether the chain was the same chain. That single unexamined assumption cost 5 children everything they had left. The man who caught the case was a Farron County Sheriff's investigator named Wade Ottinger. He was 49, divorced, and chewed sunflower seeds constantly because he'd quit smoking 18 months earlier and hated every second of it. He had worked 2 homicides in his career, both of them bar fights that ended with the guilty party still sitting there when the car arrived. He was not equipped for this. Nobody in Farron County was. By Sunday morning, there were 300 volunteers on Bittern Ridge. By Monday, there were K-9 teams from Knoxville, a state police helicopter, and 2 divers working a quarry pond 4 miles off the route. The FBI arrived Tuesday in the person of Special Agent Harlan Kep, who set up in the back room of the county library because the sheriff's office didn't have a second phone line. They did everything right, mostly, and it went nowhere. The dogs got nothing on the ridge. Not a scent trail that started and stopped. Nothing. Which meant no one had walked out of that van anywhere along those 11 miles. The helicopter flew a grid for 6 days. Divers cleared the quarry, then the Little Sandy, then a stock pond that turned out to be 4 feet deep. Then, on the 4th day, a coal contractor named Del Rosier found the van. It was in a strip mine cut off Sutter Knob Road, 19 miles from Route 174, in a county the search grid did not cover. It had been burned down to the frame. The tires were gone. The glass was gone. The blue dove was gone. There were no remains inside. Forensics was certain about that. Whatever else had happened, no one had burned in that van. And there was one more thing. Sitting upright in the cargo area, in the black ash, was a coffee can. Loyal Trask's coffee can, the one from under the driver's seat. The change was still in it. And on top of the change, folded and clean and completely untouched by the fire, were 7 paper offering envelopes, 1 for each child. Names printed on them in a pencil in a child's hand. They had been placed there after the van burned. Wade Ottinger looked at that can for a long time, and later told a reporter the only honest thing he ever said about the case. Somebody came back. Somebody came back and wanted us to know they'd counted them. That was the baffling clue. It stayed baffling for 25 years. Deacon Trask was never found. Not that week, not that year. His wool cap turned up in a ditch on Sutter Knob Road in November, and that was all Farron County ever recovered of him. 2 weeks in, the FBI's working theory was a staged abduction by an organized group with local knowledge. 6 weeks in, the working theory was that the van had been taken across state lines and the children dispersed. 6 months in, there was no working theory. Agent Kep went back to Memphis in March. The case quickly went cold. Grief in a small town is not a private thing. It's civic infrastructure. There was a memorial at the Slate Row Park with 7 concrete posts, 1 for each child, unequal heights because a committee couldn't agree. There was a scholarship. There was a vigil every October 12th at 6:34 in the evening. That started with 200 people and by 2003 drew about 9. Ray Beckett had a stroke in 1998 and died in the hospital at Morristown without ever saying anything about it. He'd stopped saying anything about it in 1993. Dot Beckett kept working at the Copper Kettle until 2004. She died on a Tuesday in March at 59 of a heart attack the doctor called sudden. Hollis has never called it that. He was 30 by then, and had watched his mother spend 13 years listening for a car in the driveway that was never going to come. He buried her on a Friday and went back to work on Monday. Hollis Beckett did not become an investigator. He did not build a wall of string and photographs. He did not go on television. He worked at a retread shop for 9 years and then took a dispatcher job at Grissom Freight, 3rd shift, routing trucks through the night. He married a woman named Charlene in 1999, and they divorced in 2006, quietly, without any particular villain. He gained weight. His hair went. He kept the house on Bickle Street. And he kept the phone. That's the thing. Cell phones came, and Hollis got one. And still he paid $19 a month for a landline nobody called, mounted on the kitchen wall, avocado green, cord frayed to the wire in 2 places. His ex-wife asked him about it once. He said he'd get around to canceling it. He never did. 25 years, $240 a year, give or take, for a phone that rang maybe 4 times a year and was always a wrong number or a survey. He couldn't have told you why. If you'd pushed him, he'd have gotten irritated and changed the subject. But somewhere underneath, in a place he didn't visit on purpose, Hollis Beckett knew exactly why. Because 5550139 was the last thing he'd ever given her. March 3rd, 2016. A Thursday, 4:12 in the afternoon. Hollis was asleep. He worked nights. He slept from about 9 in the morning until 5. The kitchen phone rang and he came out of the bedroom flat-footed and irritated, expecting a robocall about his car's extended warranty. He picked it up. He said, "Yeah." There was static on the line. Not cell static, the specific grainy hollow of a payphone or a very old handset, and behind it a sound he later identified as a highway. A woman's voice said, "Is this the Beckett house?" He said it was. She said, "Is Hollis there?" And something in the back of his neck went cold, because nobody had asked for him like that. Is Hollis there since he was a teenager, since his sister's friends used to call the house. He said, "Speaking." There was a long pause. 8 seconds. He counted them later, over and over, for years. Then the woman said, "It's Marina." Hollis Beckett sat down on the linoleum floor of his mother's kitchen with the receiver in both hands. He said her name. He said it 3 times. She didn't answer any of it. She wasn't listening. She had something she needed to say, and she was going to say it before she lost her nerve, or the line, or both. She said, "I need you to tell me something, and then I'm going to hang up." He said, "Okay." He said it about 4 times. And she said, "Did Colleen make it home?" Hollis didn't understand the question. He said, "What?" She said it again, faster, and her voice was cracking now. "Colleen Vance and Jonah. They took them out on the 11th day. Did they make it home?" Nobody would ever tell me if they made it home. And Hollis said the only thing he could say, which was the truth as he had known it for 25 years. He said, "Marina, honey, Colleen never came home. None of you came home." There was a sound on the other end of the line. He has never been able to describe it. He's tried. Then the line went dead. He called the sheriff's office. Then he called the FBI field office in Knoxville. Then he sat on the floor for a while longer. The reaction was almost exactly what you'd expect. The Farron County Sheriff's Office had received, by their own count, somewhere north of 400 calls about the church van case over 25 years. People confessing, people claiming sightings, people who had dreamed things. A woman in Oregon had called every October for 9 years. A deputy took Hollis's statement and was kind about it and did not write down the part about Colleen Vance because it didn't mean anything to him. But it meant something to Hollis. Because here's the thing, a hoax caller would not know. And here's the thing, a grief-crazed brother would not invent. Why would she ask about Colleen? If you were faking, you'd say you were alive. You'd say where you'd been. You'd ask about your mother. Marina Beckett's first and only question, after 25 years, was whether a girl from up on the hill had gotten home. Which meant Marina believed she might have. Which meant something had happened on the 11th day. Something felt wrong, really wrong. Hollis did 2 things in the next 9 days, and both of them were the acts of a freight dispatcher rather than a detective. He looked for records, because records were what he understood. First, he called the phone company and got the incoming call log for his landline. It took him 4 days and a supervisor. The call had come in at 4:12 p.m. on March 3rd from a payphone at a truck stop on Interstate 44 outside Rolla, Missouri. A payphone in 2016. There were fewer than a dozen left in that county. Second, and this is where it turns, he went looking for the church records. Hope Bethel Mission had closed in 2009. Its paper went into a storage unit off the Marbury Hill bypass, paid for out of a memorial fund, forgotten by everyone but the woman who wrote the check. Hollis got the key from her on a Saturday morning in the middle of March. He spent 6 hours in a metal box in the cold going through hymnals, offering ledgers, and 40 years of Sunday school attendance. Both churches used the same system because First Fellowship had bought the supplies for both. Each child had a punch card. Every service, you punched the date. 12 punches got you a certificate. It was the kind of small ritual that runs on autopilot for decades. The 1991 cards were in a shoebox with a rubber band that had fused to the cardboard. Hollis found Marina's. 15 punches, the last one dated October 6, 1991. He found Danny Oakes's, C.C. Marsh's, Ruth Ann, and Wesley Pryor's. All of them stopped on the same date, 6 days before the van. Then he found the 2 cards that had been filed with them by mistake, Hill Kids cards, in a Mill Church's shoebox, because someone had collected everything from the van that fall and stuffed it wherever it fit. Colleen Vance's card, and Jonah Little's. Colleen Vance's card had a punch dated October 27, 91. 15 days after she vanished. Jonah Little's had one dated October 27, 1991, and another dated November 3, 1991. Hollis Beckett sat down on a concrete floor for the second time in a month, and his blood ran cold. You cannot walk into a courthouse with a punch card and a phone bill and be taken seriously. Hollis found that out fast. What changed everything was a woman named Odette Baird. She was 38, a lawyer out of Knoxville who did court-appointed work, guardianships, victim advocacy, the unglamorous end of the profession. She had been assigned, 3 weeks earlier, to a case referred by a Missouri legal aid office. A woman in her mid-30s with no birth certificate, no social security number, no driver's license, and no legal existence, who had walked into a clinic in Rolla and given a name that came back attached to a Tennessee death certificate issued in absentia in 1998. Marina Beckett had been declared legally dead when she was 18 years old. She was now a living person that the state of Tennessee said did not exist. Odette Baird's job was to fix that. Her duty ran to one client and one client only. She and Hollis met in a Cracker Barrel off I-40 in April 2016. He brought a shoebox. She brought a legal pad. She has said since that she did not believe him about Colleen Vance for the first 40 minutes. She believed the punch card was a clerical error. Cards get punched wrong. A volunteer runs down a row and punches everything in front of her. Then Hollis put the 2 cards on the table side by side and asked her a question. "If it's a mistake," he said, "why is it a mistake on exactly the 2 rich kids?" They started with Colleen Vance because she was the one Marina had asked about. The Vance family had left Cordell Springs in June of 1992, 8 months after the disappearance. Vance Lumber and Supply was sold to a regional chain. The house on Marbury Hill went for well under its value. Everyone in town understood it. You couldn't blame a family for leaving after that. That's what everyone said. You couldn't blame them. The forwarding address was a P.O. box in Columbus, Ohio. Odette Baird ran a public record search on the family name and got nothing useful. Then she ran the mother's maiden name, Hessler. There was a Colleen Hessler, born 1979 in Delaware County, Ohio. Real estate agent. 2 children. A photograph on a brokerage website of a woman in her late 30s with a wide face and dark eyebrows. Hollis stared at that photograph for a long time. He had gone to school with Colleen Vance's cousin. He knew that face. It was her. She was alive. She had been alive the entire time. Odette Baird made the call. She did not identify herself as an attorney. She said she was interested in a listing. She asked a few questions about the property, and then, in the same tone, asked Colleen Hessler whether she'd ever lived in Tennessee. The line went quiet for 9 seconds. Then Colleen Hessler said, "Who gave you this number?" and hung up. 2 hours later, Odette Baird's phone rang, and it was a lawyer in Columbus. Jonah Little was easier. Jonah Little had never left. He was 35 years old and worked as a pharmacist at a chain drugstore in Kingsport, Tennessee, 41 miles from Cordell Springs. He had not changed his name. He had not hidden. He was in the phone book. Hollis drove there on a Wednesday and stood in the aisle by the blood pressure cuffs for 20 minutes, watching a man in a white coat count pills into a tray. He didn't confront him. He couldn't. He went out and sat in the truck and put his head on the steering wheel. Because he'd understood something in that aisle. Jonah Little wasn't hiding. Jonah Little had been living 41 miles away, under his own name, doing an ordinary job, for a quarter of a century while 5 families and 1 whole town went to a memorial with 7 concrete posts every October. You don't hide a thing like that. You bury it. And burying it takes more than one man. Odette Baird filed a records request with the Farron County Sheriff's Office and, separately, AAFOYA with the FBI, seeking the complete 1991 case file. The Sheriff's Office produced 340 pages. The FBI produced 1,900. of which roughly 600 were redacted or withheld. But the FBI file contained something the county file didn't. A 2-page memorandum dated October 24, 1991, from Special Agent Harlan Koepp, summarizing a meeting held the previous evening at Cordell Springs First Fellowship. The memo recorded that the Bureau had been approached on the 22nd regarding a purported ransom demand. It recorded that the demand had been assessed by a private consultant retained by the church's insurance carrier. And it recorded, in the flat language of federal paperwork, the consultant's conclusion: contact assessed as non-credible, opportunistic hoax, no further investigative value. Family representatives concur. Koepp had accepted it. Why wouldn't he? Every high-profile missing child case in America generates hoax ransom calls. The consultant was a professional. The families agreed. The memo was the last substantive entry in the file for 11 weeks. Odette Baird read it 4 times and then said the sentence that broke the case open. "They didn't lose the trail," she said. "Somebody closed it." Here is what they proved over the next 5 months. It was not a confession that proved it, and it was not testimony. It was arithmetic. Continental Sentinel Mutual had written a policy for Cordell Springs First Fellowship's youth ministry in 1988. Attached to it was a special contingency rider, a kidnap and ransom product, sold routinely to churches and schools throughout the 1980s, most of which was never claimed on in the entire life of the policy. Limit: $500,000. The rider covered enrolled participants in the youth program. Enrollment was the punch card. Hope Bethel's children rode the van. They sang in the same services. They were counted onto and off of that vehicle by loyal Trask every other Saturday for 11 years. They were not enrolled. 2 children on that van were covered by a $500,000 policy. 5 were not. The claim file, subpoenaed from Continental Sentinel's archive in Hartford, showed a first notice of loss filed October 14, 1991, 2 days after the disappearance. It showed a consultant assigned the same day, Garrett Frayne of Ardent Risk Group, Nashville. It showed a wire transfer of $340,000 executed on October 22, 1991, from a Continental Sentinel account to a settlement account controlled by Ardent Risk Group. And it showed Ardent's invoice, itemized, in the way that professional invoices always are, because the whole reason a professional keeps records is to get paid. October 22nd. Field Logistics. 2 operators. Farron/Granger Company, Tennessee. 18 hours. October 23rd. Recovery transport, 2 subjects. I-81 corridor. Medical standby. October 23rd. Client conference. Disclosure counsel present. 2 subjects. October 23rd. The 11th day. There was a second document in the claim file, and it is the document that turned a tragedy into a crime. It was a 1-page settlement addendum, signed October 24th, 1991. By Reverend Nolan Ashby Pike on behalf of the church, by a representative of Continental Sentinel, and by Garrett Frayne on behalf of Ardent. It contained a confidentiality provision, which was normal. It contained a cooperation provision, which was normal. And it contained a clause, drafted by an insurance lawyer in a hotel room in Knoxville, which read, in part, that the insured and the affected families would refrain from public statements, media engagement, or independent search activity that could compromise the safety of any remaining subjects or the carrier's subrogation position. Independent search activity. They wrote it down. They wrote down that the families would stop looking. And then, because paying a ransom is a legally messy thing that private consultants prefer not to have on the record, they told the FBI it had been a hoax. Garrett Frayne got 2 children back. 2 children whose parents had a policy. Then he told the federal government the trail was cold. And then he sent an invoice. Hollis Beckett read that clause in a conference room in Knoxville in September 2016. He didn't shout. Odette Baird has said that's what she remembers most, that he didn't shout. He asked her one question. Where were the other 5 on October 23rd? She said she didn't know. He said, they were 19 miles from a burned van in a county nobody searched, and these men knew that. They had directions. Reverend Nolan Ashby Pike was 81 years old and living at the Willow Bend Care Community outside Johnson City. He agreed to see Hollis. That surprised everybody, including his own family. Odette Baird advised against it. Then came along. He was in a wheelchair by a window with a view of a parking lot. He had a blanket on his knees. He'd been a big man once and wasn't anymore. He knew who Hollis was before anyone said it. You're Dot's boy, he said. Hollis said he was. They sat there for a while. Then Nolan Pike said something that Hollis has repeated in 3 depositions and 1 televised interview. And every time he says it, his jaw sets in the same place. He said, we got 2 of them out. Do you understand? 2. Nobody was going to get any of them out. We got 2. Hollis said, you got the 2 that were insured. And the old man's face went through something. Not shame, exactly. Something more like exhaustion at having to explain a thing he'd explained to himself 10,000 times in the dark. That's not why, he said. That's just how it was paid for. And then you told them to stop searching. We were told they'd kill the rest if it went public. His hands were shaking on the blanket. We were told that. What was I supposed to do? Hollis said, you were supposed to tell my mother that 2 of them came home. Pike didn't answer. You let her go to a vigil, Hollis said. For 13 years. You stood next to her at that vigil. There's a picture of you with your hand on her back. Pike looked out the window at the parking lot. I baptized 4 of those children, he said. I have prayed about it every day for 25 years. And Hollis Beckett said quietly, the line that ended the conversation and eventually ran under his photograph in a national magazine. Praying isn't the same as looking. Garrett Frayne was 74 and still consulting. He met investigators with 2 attorneys present and answered nothing. His position, filed in writing, was that his firm had performed a lawful recovery under carrier instruction, that no law compelled a private consultant to direct federal investigative resources, and that the outcome 2 children returned alive was the best outcome achievable under the circumstances. He said on the record that he stood by every decision he made in October of 1991. He said, you are second-guessing a rescue. Odette Baird's response in a filing that October was 17 words long. A rescue that ends by telling the government there is nothing left to rescue is not a rescue. She came back in November of 2016. Not dramatically. There was no airport scene, no crowd, no news trucks. Odette Baird made absolutely certain of that. Her client came back in a rented sedan with a legal advocate and a caseworker to a 2-bedroom apartment in Knoxville with a lease in a name the state was still arguing about. Hollis was told he could come on the 3rd day, not before. Her terms, through her lawyer. He waited 3 days. When the door opened, he did not recognize her at all. And then all at once he did, entirely not the face. The way she stood. Weight on one leg, other foot turned out. Exactly the way an 11-year-old had stood on a gravel lot with her hand on a car window. She was 36 years old, Her hair had gone dark. She had a scar through her left eyebrow. She said, "You got old." He said, "You didn't." And then they both stood there in a hallway crying in a way that neither of them had done in front of another person in 25 years. Here is something important, and it's the part the movie version would get wrong. Marina Beckett did not sit down and deliver the story. She couldn't. She'd been 11. She'd been in the dark for a lot of it. She'd been told lies by professionals at it for years, large parts of what she believed were wrong, and she knew they might be wrong, and she said so constantly, and it distressed her. The case was not solved by her testimony. The case was solved by wire dates and invoices and a punch card. And the reason that matters is that it meant nobody had to make a traumatized woman carry the weight of proof. She was asked to confirm, not to prove. What she gave, over 11 months, in fragments, out of order, was this: the 11th day, she remembered. She remembered it best because it was the day the world had a door in it. A man came in the morning and read 2 names off a piece of paper: Colleen, Jonah. He told them they were going home. He told the other 5 it would be their turn soon. Colleen Vance did not want to go without them and had to be carried out. They went through the doorway, and the doorway closed. Soon lasted the rest of her childhood. The 9th day, she remembered because of Danny. Danny Oakes was 13, and he understood, somehow, before any of the adults did, that being useful was the only currency he had. He told the man he could work. He said he'd worked a tow yard since he was 10. He could pull an engine, he could do anything, and he'd stay and do it if the little ones got fed. It worked. That's the terrible part. It worked for a while. The 6th day, she did not want to talk about, and it took her 9 months to say it out loud in a room with a federal agent in it. C.C. Marsh was 6 years old and had asthma, and her inhaler was in a Ziploc bag in her coat pocket, and her coat was in a burned van 19 miles away, and the spare was in a glove box that no longer existed. C.C. Marsh died on the 6th day. That was 5 days before Colleen Vance and Jonah Little walked out a door and got in a car. 5 days before a wire transfer. And nobody at that hotel room signing table on October 24th, 1991, asked how many children were still alive. There is one more piece of the 9th day, and it is the reason this story exists at all. Danny Oakes, 13 years old, split knuckles, counting heads out loud like a man checking inventory, made the other children recite their home phone numbers every single night before they slept. All of them. All 7 at first, then 6, then 5. He made it a chant. He made it a rhythm, the way you learn a song. Marina Beckett's number was 5550139, and she said it out loud, in the dark, in a stranger's building. More than 400 times. Danny told them, "They'll change everything about you. They can't change that. That's yours." Danny Oakes died in the spring of 1992 of an infection in his hand that nobody treated. He was 14 years old for 11 days before he died. And 24 years later, a woman standing at a payphone outside Rolla, Missouri, with 60 cents and no last name, dialed 10 digits she had never once written down. And a man who had spent $19 a month for 25 years on a phone he couldn't explain picked it up. The property was 71 acres near Sutter Knob in the next county over. And it had belonged to a man named Rady Colfax, who ran a salvage yard and a boys' work camp that never had a license, never had an inspection, and never appeared in a single county record because it never applied for one. Rady Colfax had died in 2009 of emphysema at home, with a hospice nurse present. He was never charged with anything. He never will be. And this story is not going to give him more room than that, because he was not the reason the search stopped. Federal agents and a forensic anthropology team worked that property for 14 weeks in the spring of 2017. They recovered the remains of Cecilia Marsh, age 6. They recovered the remains of Danny Oakes, age 14. They recovered the remains of Loyal Trask, age 61, in a sinkhole 400 yards from the road with his hands bound. He had been shot on the first day. He had not gone quietly, and there was evidence of that. And his family, a niece in Bristol, who had never stopped writing letters to the sheriff, asked that this be said out loud at the press conference. It was. Ruth Ann Pryor and Wesley Pryor were not found. They were moved off that property sometime in 1993, when Ruth Ann was 11 and Wesley was 9. Marina remembers a car. She remembers Ruth Ann holding her brother's hand. She does not remember anything else and has never claimed to. There is no trail. Brady Colfax kept no records and told no one. And the one man who might have known died in 2001. 2 children came home in 1991. 1 came home in 2016. 3 were recovered and buried. 2 are still out there somewhere, and their case is still open. And every few months, Odette Baird's office puts out an age progression image that nobody responds to. The count does not balance. It is never going to balance. In February 2018, a federal grand jury in the Eastern District of Tennessee returned an 11-count indictment. Garrett Frayne was charged with conspiracy to obstruct justice, obstruction of a federal investigation, false statements to a federal officer, and insurance fraud. He was convicted on 9 of 11 counts in November 2019 and sentenced to 7 years. He was 77 at sentencing. He read a statement that was not an apology. Continental Sentinel Mutual settled a civil action brought by the Marsh, Oakes, Pryor, Beckett, and Trask families for an amount that was not disclosed but was reported by people in a position to know, as the largest of its kind in state history. The company also entered a consent decree with the Tennessee Department of Commerce and Insurance governing the handling of contingency claims involving minors. The Vance and Little families were not charged. Prosecutors declined, publicly and with some care, noting that both families had acted under an explicit threat to the lives of 5 other children and had received legal advice from counsel retained by an insurer whose interests were not theirs. That distinction mattered legally. It did not matter to Slate Rowe. Reverend Nolan Ashby Pike was indicted on 2 counts and found incompetent to stand trial in April 2019 due to advanced dementia. He died the following January. Whether that constitutes escape or its own kind of sentence is not something this story is going to settle for you. There is one more scene, and it is not the one you'd expect. In October 2018, Colleen Hessler, born Colleen Vance, drove down from Ohio and asked, through lawyers, to meet Marina Beckett. Odette Baird advised against it. Marina said yes anyway. They met in a conference room with no one else present. It lasted 2 hours and 40 minutes. Neither woman has ever described what was said in it, and both have declined, repeatedly, to do so. What is known is this. Colleen Vance was 12 years old on October 23, 1991. She was carried out of that building screaming. She was returned to parents who moved her to another state, changed her surname, told her never to speak of it, and enrolled her in a school under a history that had been invented for her. She was told, at 12, that if she ever said a word, 5 children would die. She carried that for 27 years. When she came out of that conference room, she went to the press. All of it. Every detail she had. She sat for depositions she did not have to sit for. Her testimony was material at Frayne's trial. Her parents did not speak to her for 2 years. Jonah Little has never given a statement, never given an interview, and still lives in Kingsport. He has asked to be left alone, and this story will honor that. There's no clean line in this. There are people who did a monstrous thing for a reason they'd been handed by professionals, and lived inside it until it hollowed them out. Marina Beckett got her legal existence back in stages, which is how bureaucracy returns things. A court order vacating a death declaration in March 2017. A replacement birth certificate in June. A social security number, a new one, because her original had been used by 3 different people in 4 states in September. A driver's license in November at the age of 37 on the 2nd attempt because she failed the parallel park. Hollis Beckett drove her to the test both times. He waited in the parking lot with the radio down low. She lives in Knoxville. She works part-time. She sees a trauma specialist twice a week and has, by her own account, good months and bad ones, and has asked that nobody describe her as healed, because she says that's a word people use to make themselves comfortable. The house on Bickle Street sold in 2019. Hollis kept the phone, not the service the phone, the actual avocado green handset off the kitchen wall, cord frayed to the wire in 2 places. It sits on a shelf in his apartment, unplugged, connected to nothing. People ask about it. He tells them. And on the anniversary now, they don't go to the memorial on Slate Row with the 7 unequal concrete posts. They go to a diner on the highway, and they order coffee, and they say 5 names out loud. Danny Oakes, Cecilia Marsh, Loyal Trask, Ruth Ann Pryor, Wesley Pryor. 2 of those names get said last and slower because those 2 are not finished. We tell ourselves that the truth comes out because the truth is powerful. That it rises, that it surfaces, that it insists. That's not what happened here. The truth in this case did not rise. It sat in a filing cabinet in Hartford, Connecticut, in an itemized invoice for 25 years, while a town held vigils around a lie that professional men had signed their names to. It came out because a 13-year-old boy in the dark made 5 children recite 10 digits until the digits were part of them. It came out because a man in Tennessee paid $19 a month for a phone he could not explain and would not cancel. It came out because a woman standing at a payphone with 60 cents did the bravest thing in this entire story, which was to hope out loud. The people who vanish are not always running. Sometimes they are held. Sometimes they are counted and priced and quietly written off by men in a hotel room who will tell you, decades later, that they did the best they could. But love keeps a phone line open with nothing on the other end. Love makes a chant out of a phone number so a child can carry it through 25 years of dark. And in the end, in the only way that matters here, imperfect, unequal, 25 years too late for most of them, love proved stronger than the darkness. Thank you for staying to the end of this one.